Good morning. Good morning, morning, morning. Today is September 25th, Sunday. Uh, Welcome. Switching seats here. All right. Well, it's been a couple of weeks. We have been traveling and life stuff getting in the way, but welcome back. Trying to get this a little higher. Let's set our intentions and make aspirations by saying the four immeasurables prayer. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings not be separated from the happiness that has never known suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about a book I'm reading, and we'll meditate, and then Victoria is going to join us. And she's going to discuss a topic, and then we'll do a Q&A. Not to bum anybody out, but I want to talk about death today, which is something that all of us are going to deal with. From a Buddhist point of view, it's something we've dealt with in countless times in the past. And it's an extremely important experience that we are preparing for actually by practice, especially meditation practice, any kind of mindfulness and working with mind and awareness, because from a Buddhist point of view, it's very, very important to bring mindful awareness into the death experience. And I have a book here that is really, really good, both for us as meditators or practitioners or both, and also to it's very good instructions for helping others, loved ones or friends, or who are actually going through or about to go through the process of dying. One of the Buddha's great teachings was when he went into parinirvana, because he really, in his 80s, Buddha taught for many, many years, like 50 years or so, and was enlightened, for that amount of time. And his final teaching was that his death, his passing into parinirvana, which was to, this ultimate teaching about impermanence, which is a very fundamental aspect of the view of Buddhism. So this book is, I've talked about this teacher before, who I think is one of the most important Buddhist teachers, maybe one of the most important people, period, teaching on the planet, Zansa Khyentse Rinpoche. The book is called Living is Dying, How to Prepare for Death, Dying, and Beyond. I'm just going to read a little bit. Buddha said that of all mindfulness meditations, the mindfulness of death is the most important. Talking about death is never inauspicious. In fact, we should all talk about death far more than we do. We will all die, so death is not just a subject for the dying or the very old. I think everyone should be encouraged to think and talk about death. Perhaps we should sponsor giant billboards in big cities and subway stations that say things like, "Your life is ticking away," or "Every second brings you closer to death." And shouldn't birthday celebrations include the reminder that death is now 1 year closer? If you want to introduce death into a conversation with materialists who dismiss anything spiritual as mere superstition, you must do it skillfully. In this human realm, difficult to handle subjects tend to be ignored or denied. So bringing up the subject of death too directly could risk alienating those you are trying to help. Concentrate instead on gently introducing them to a little general information about impermanence. Point out that impermanence and change aren't necessarily negative. In fact, and this is really, really important, impermanence is what makes improvement and change possible. Tell them it is because everything is impermanent that we can change our lives for the better. But before any improvements can be made, we must first understand and accept the impermanent nature of phenomena. After that, you can gradually introduce the fact that life itself is impermanent. Um, we've never really touched on this. We've spoken about reincarnation, and how karma dictates and dictates your future rebirths, and how it follows you into the next life and things like that. But the actual truth that we will die, and the truth that we don't know when that is. I may not make it through this class, nor may any of you. That's not to be morbid or whatever, but that's really reality. Life is completely unpredictable, absolutely impermanent, and none of us know, when we will breathe our last. Why is this important? Is that it's really, you have to really think about where do you want your mind to be when that moment comes? Do you want it to be in the grips of negative habitual patterns and emotions like anger, grasping, desire, jealousy, you know, pridefulness, and things like that, regret, guilt, all those things, right? So it's almost a real think of it as a motivating factor to really work on having clarity, working on the nature, on touching the nature of your mind, working on knowing and having faith that mind is Buddha. That is not a metaphor. That statement that Garchen Rinpoche, said for in relation to us starting this class, or starting the component of the class that actually dealt a little bit with Buddha Dharma, was that Buddha is not the name of man; it's the name of mind. Every one of us has Buddha nature. The true nature of our mind, when we purify and we go beyond all these negative habitual patterns and emotions, the true nature, the baseline, if you will, is Buddha. And we have to begin to have faith in that and step into that and know that and honor that. And the closer we are, the more we embody that at the moment of our death, the more advantageous it is in the bardo. The bardo is the time between lives, if you will. And this book goes into very good detail about, how we can prepare and actually what to do and what to look for in that between life experience, and the possibility that we have for enlightenment in the bardo, but also, to allow us circumstances and causes and conditions that give us a rebirth that could be more benefit to other beings in our next life. We can make those kind of aspirations. We can kind of, through doing this work, steer ourselves towards towards the nature of our mind, and towards that Buddha mind, towards that being the, more realized, if you will. That's why it's so important what you're doing now, working on the mind, having some contemplative practice, working on mindful awareness and understanding that there is a nature of mind, understanding that, that Buddha mind is there and it's accessible. It's always been there. You can't get rid of it. It always will be there. It's just that causes and conditions and the karma that we've created and the habitual patterns and emotions that have set in over this life and countless lives before it have obscured us from this. But those are temporary, those are impermanent. With that in mind, let's let's work with our mind and meditate. Let's start with the I need to get my thing. Okay, let's start with the 9 purifying breaths, which we start with we make the Vajra fist, the thumb to the base of the ring finger and close, and we'll keep this throughout the 9 purifying breaths. And we'll go with the right hand to the left nostril. We'll breathe. Imagine the 3 subtle body channels. The middle is blue. In men, traditionally, the white is on the right, the red is on the left. And they go from the nostrils, they go up to the back of the head, down, adjacent to the spine, and the 3 of them join at the navel. And when we breathe into the channel, we're going this way, down, holding, and then out the same way, except for the last breath, which we'll get to. So let's take the right, we'll go to the left nostril, close it, breathe into the right channel. Switch nostrils and breathe out. Now we switch. We go into the right hand, Vajra fist. Keep the Vajra fist on the left. Keep Vajra fist. Put your hands on your knees and breathe both nostrils into the central channel. The last breath, rather than eject through the nose, imagine it going through the crown chakra, that last breath going out, merging your consciousness with space, and we'll take it right into meditation. Forceful exhale out of the crown chakra. Just relax. Back is straight but not rigid. Shoulders are upright but not pulled back. You're erect but relaxed. Chin is tilted down a little bit. Breathing through the nose if you can. Thoughts will arise in your mind. The key to the whole practice is recognizing what is arising in your mind and then recognizing it as impermanent, insubstantial, and almost imagine it dissipating like a cloud into the sky. As a cloud arises from the sky, it dissolves back in the sky. Thought arises in the mind, dissolves back into the mind. Does not alter, stain, or change the mind in any way. And your mind, we use that analogy of that limitless, clear, open, spacious, calm blue sky. You can also focus on the breath, where the breath moves in and out, space between the nostrils and the upper lip. And if you find yourself thinking, which hopefully you will, become aware of the fact that you're thinking, you'll focus again on the breath. Those are two of the techniques you use. The third is probably the hardest, but some of you may be doing this. Mind looking at mind. When the thoughts arise, you're using mind to become aware of the fact that the thought has arisen and then just leaving it where it is. Rather than our habitual tendency to follow the thought, elaborate on the thought, listen to the thought, guide the thought, get pulled by the thought, pull the thought, get entangled, ensnared by it. We're just leaving it. Oh, there's that thought about the bill I have to pay. That's it. Leave it. Mind looking at mind. What is the mind that looks at mind? If you need a deeper breath, take it, but your breath really should be easy breath, relaxed. You can, if you want, focus a bit on the breath going through the subtle body channels, like we did in the 9 purifying breaths. Going up, holding, where they 3 join at the navel, and then the breath will come back up and out. You can do that too if that helps. It's also a good way to start to really become more aware of those. Back to the breath. You may have a lot of thoughts arising one after the other, or as you work with one thought and see it dissipate like a cloud back into the sky, another one arises immediately. That's totally fine. A lot of people get hung up with and think that they're failing at meditating, or they can't meditate, because when they start, when you really start to meditate, you see how busy the mind actually is. That's why it seems like a lot more thoughts than usual, because usually we're not aware of it. We're just in it. We're in that story. Endless, interconnected story, interlocked stories that one beat leads to the next. Back to the breath. And we're interrupting that. with mindfulness, really, with awareness, mind looking at mind. Eyes, we work in this class with eyes open for the most part. Although sometimes you may need to just close them to kind of reset or something, that's okay. Some people prefer their eyes closed, but A, can create a tendency to fall asleep, and B, we interact with the world primarily with our eyes open. So the practice of meditating with the eyes open and working with our minds with our eyes open, I think, is good training for working with our mind in all situations. Okay. Um, and just to continue, this book is really good. Nick, if you could get a card later, maybe put it up. Living is Dying by Garchen Rinpoche. Um, you know, when talking about death again, the last thing I'll say about it is, thinking about it should, at a minimum, give us the inspiration to realize it's the time to practice is now, not to put it off when you think you'll have more time, or when you're less stressed, or when you figure out or end this relationship or begin this relationship, or get this new job. There's a never ending um, you know never ending ocean of experiences that are going to happen. Then you'll never have it figured out, but you can go right to the root, which is the mind, and work with the mind there. So, um, you know, the time is now, really, because death is inevitable and the time of death is completely unpredictable. So, okay, Victoria is going to talk a bit about a different topic, I believe. Can you tell us what you're going to talk about today, please?
Well, in many ways, Michael prefaced it so beautifully with Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche's book, and mentioning about emptiness and permanence. Those are all the things that turn our mind from samsara to practice, to Dharma. I mean, we discussed last time we were together, we discussed the four thoughts that turn the mind. And so, karma, impermanence, suffering, and the preciousness of human life. So we have this precious human vessel that is capable of reaching the base level of our mind. And I would like to start today with just very, very briefly to reiterate again, we've spoken about it many, many times. In the Western philosophical traditions, mind is spoken of as just this one layer, one kind of a flat cake that doesn't have many levels. We kind of go with the same mind from childhood to adulthood to old age and wisdom. We think of mind becoming more ripe, more wise when we acquire tons and tons of information. But in Buddhism, it's completely not this way. In Buddhism, We have many layers to mind. We start the definition of mind. It's not about definition. It's, of course, it's about experiencing the mind, and that's what we do through practice. The first and the ground, the first and last, the Alpha and Omega mind is our Buddha nature mind. It is the constant stream of awareness that underlies all of our experiences. That is the mind that is never asleep. While we're dreaming and having nightmares, that mind is there. That mind is also there when we're deluded and we do terrible things and we don't understand karma. That stream of river of awareness, that mind is there when we also start to practice and we move away from obscurations and creating negativity. That mind is also there through and underneath the ego. That mind is there whether we do good things, bad things. That mind is unstained. It is not capable of changing because that mind does not arise and it does not stay and does not cease like temporary events of this life. On the other hand, in Western tradition, we think of mind as only this intellectual conceptual mind, which is like a big library of ideas, and the more we accumulate, often that is considered a mark of great accomplishment. We often don't see that these kinds of minds that become stuffed and very thick and full of ideas also become very thick and full of themselves and create things like arrogance and reinforce things like ignorance and create causes and circumstances for negative behavior. So with that in mind, we're always talking about distinguishing at least the two basic levels of mind: the ignorant mind, the vijnana mind, and the jnana mind. This nature of mind that is the ground for anything that can possibly happen in terms of mind and awareness. It is the river of consciousness that never ceases, and is on the basis of that consciousness we're able to have all kinds of experiences, positive and negative. And today I particularly would like to turn to just to speak about why and how we are so often stuck in the perpetually negative mind. Why that mind covers like mud the beneath stream of our Buddha nature. This habitual pattern of this conceptual intellectual mind always feeling like it is everything. It is the whole of everything that we are. It is the whole of everything that we have. And why we are so deeply misled if we do not realize and don't practice and try to access deeper layers of our mind, especially when we don't work to access our Buddha nature. And I would like to start with the quote from a beautiful new book by Khentrul Lodrotaya Rinpoche that is called The Power of Mind. And I recommend very much that everyone gets it. It's a beautiful, beautiful beginner book. Not just beginner, it's a book for all levels, but it's specifically written for people who have, as an introduction to this very topic on how to practice deeper levels of mind, how to become aware of what ignorance is, this whole conceptual structure of a small layer of mind, a small space of mind, a small piece of mind, as in comparison to the never ceasing flow of river of awareness that is our Buddha nature. And it is beautifully and clearly written, and I find it to be extremely beneficial for people of all levels, but especially for people who are just starting the practice of Buddhism, the path. I would like to start today with a quote from this book that says, it's chapter 2, Mind Freeing Mind, the Practice. The actual practice, training and bodhicitta, because remember, bodhicitta is this under layer of mind. We describe this never ceasing stream of awareness as bodhicitta. We refer to it with that word, bodhicitta. Freedom does not come from external circumstances, it comes from within. Practice is the process of our mind freeing itself through great compassion and profound wisdom. To succeed, we must transcend theoretical concepts and make these teachings our direct experience. What Rinpoche is saying with this quote is that we cannot add to this library of conceptual mind, because that conceptual mind is the level of mind in Buddhism that is referred to as yid mind, and we've covered it in terms of the 8 consciousnesses. That is a conglomerate of where we perceive through the ego. Conceptual mind is the source that maintains the ego and everything else as other. It's the dualistic experience of subject and object, of self and other. This is how we experience reality, and that is a layer of mind. It's a very small space of mind. It's a very small portion of mind that arises and is supported by our Buddha nature, the never ceasing river of awareness that we refer to as bodhicitta. But often, and especially because we come from Western tradition, for us Westerners, it's very, very difficult to think of mind as anything other than the small conglomerate of this conceptual mind with the ego at its center. And why do we practice? Is that because we want to experience this deeper layer of reality, and this layer of reality is how we also become aware of what the nature of things and mind is, and that's what Michael prefaced with by multiple quotes by Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche. And the next page in Khentrul Lodrötaya Rinpoche's book, when he starts to talk about ultimate bodhicitta, which is another way of saying the true nature of reality, of mind and phenomena, he uses this sentence which kind of spurred me to think about the topic we'll cover now. And he says, finding freedom begins with the wish to be free from suffering. The main practices that lead to this are those which cultivate awakened mind, or bodhicitta in Sanskrit. And this sentence, finding freedom begins with the wish to be free from suffering, is something that really, really struck me. And I said to myself, what is this? Then, samsara, another word for samsara is suffering. And we suffer. The cause of suffering is ignorance, of course. It is twofold. The ignorance is twofold. Is that we don't know nature of reality, and that because of that, we are constantly committing negative deeds. And negative deeds are committed through body, speech, and mind. So it is our thoughts, it is our speech, and it is our actions. Needless to say, when we're ignorant about the nature of reality, about the nature of mind and phenomena, when we think that things are permanent and we're seeking pleasures, I have this ice cream, I want it all the time, but if somebody makes me eat ice cream for 24 hours, that pleasure, becomes pain very, very quickly. Even after 10 minutes of being forced to eat ice cream continuously, we go from pleasure to suffering, and the basis of it is, of course, not being aware of the true nature of reality and mind. But this sentence, finding freedom begins with a wish to be free from suffering, it really made me realize that suffering is something that we are so habituated, because suffering is samsara, and we're so habituated to samsara, which is another way of saying we're so habituated to suffering. And I realized that we spent most of our time perpetuating suffering and feeling suffering. And you know, this is just my personal experience, and I will read out some notes that I jotted down in regard to this experience. And that namely is that suffering and or happiness, suffering and happiness, is just a matter in which we process information. It is how we characterize, judge, experience as good and bad. Uh, and we stick these labels onto sensory and mental content. Therefore, one and the same thing is experienced by different beings, by different persons, uh, as two different things. In one person, it arouses a happy feeling, and in another person, it arouses an experience of misery. And today, I particularly want to address the experience of misery, which we need to abandon if we are going to go onto the path of practice, a path of liberation. Because what we need to liberate ourselves from is this continuous stream of suffering and addiction to this suffering. Happy and sad are mental states we fabricate and support by our own narratives. They don't exist in themselves out there, just as Rinpoche said. They're not things out there. And Rinpoche used, Khentrul Lodro Rinpoche used this phrase, which I think should be a mantra for all of us. He said, if we change our mind, we change our experience. And this is really the key. And that's what we do as practice. We change our mind so that we can produce a different kind of experience. When we examine what is the ground of perpetually sad, suffering person, what is the state of their mind? I find in my personal experience, when I am sad and I have this negative state of mind, and if I examine it, what I find there is a very strong sense of self-grasping. Actually, I find a fixation of the self at the core of a sad experience, at the core of a depressed experience. What I find is a sense of the strongest self-fixation. At the core of a miserable, afraid state of mind, self is the king. The type of mindset that processes every little atom of this world as something that is against the self, against me, that threatens the self, that agonizes the self, that agonizes me. In reality, though, this kind of self-fixation, suffering, is a self-fabricated, impermanent quality that we ourselves first fabricate and then we fixate upon. We indulge and crave that suffering. It gives us all a pleasure we seek. It's the pleasure we have when we gossip, when we talk to each other and say, oh, that bad person, oh, my mother's, all these kinds of narratives that we indulge perpetually. And because we indulge in them so persistently, so ubiquitously, is why I call it pleasure. Because why otherwise would we want to perpetuate these negative experiences? But there's something there that gives us like a tremendous sense of self, that we're better when we're criticizing someone, that we're something important when we gossip and put down and judge others. There's something that we find there that's very pleasing. And that pleasure is just a habit that creates suffering and is suffering, but we are unable to see it for what it is. And we really identify with it so strongly that we cannot get away from that bondage. We cannot escape that slavery and the dark, because at the core of it is the self, the self-indulgence, self-fixation. We reinforce that negative mind fixed on the self every moment, every day. We perceive everything out there as pivoted against us, aiming to hurt us. In reality, it's just the way we process information. and how we classify this information to fit our intentionality. And most of the time, our intentionality is very negative. If internally our mental state is negative, everything out there is bad, difficult, it is against the self, it is against me. The sun is too hot, the water is too wet, that person said something, but it's not just perceived as their opinion, but a strike against myself. Every experience is turned into misery because we desire, we insist that the world is a bad place. It feeds our ego, the drama of self-pity, self-indulgence. By self-indulgence, I mean the feeling or the thought that no one understands me, no one has it worse than me, etc., etc. We indulge in these feelings all the time, and that is suffering. The suffering is not out there. The suffering is in here. It's how we process information. And our habituation to suffering is so deep and so all-pervasive. And that's why I wanted to address it today. So some people smile in face of cancer or tremendous difficulty, while others feel that when their nail is broken, their health is going to hell. Being satisfied with what we have, with what we are, is happiness. Accepting difficulties that arise is being clear about karma, is becoming practitioners, taking obstacles on the path, as opposed to reinforcing these narratives. I have it the worst. You know, when we're laying around in our beautiful bed with our beautiful our beautiful bamboo sheets, drinking a very expensive cup of tea, and then we indulge in this narrative. Oh, I have it the worst. My mother is the most difficult. My children are the most difficult. My boss is a monster. This, and I mean the ubiquitousness of this kind of suffering while we're laying around. Most of the time in the West, we're surrounded by luxury, because to someone who has not even one meal a day, they would take our suffering in a heartbeat, and they would consider it to be the greatest happiness of all the happinesses that exist. So taking difficulties upon the path is a practice, and it is real practice. When we feel suffering, we should turn our mind onto itself, and we should ask ourselves, what is the source of this suffering? Where does it all arise from? And we should always and definitively find this factory, this producer, this production of miserable states of mind, the ego and its desire and its indulgence in this negative stream, in this negative narrative that we constantly produce, and we're very addicted to these mental states of calling everything bad. For many of us, finding misery, i.e. classifying each and every experience as bad, difficult, negative, world against me, is tantamount to saying, see, I told you so. Everything is crap. No need to do anything. No point in changing anything. And what is this voice? It is certainly not a voice of anything out there. It is all intrinsic. It is all ours. This is the sound of misery and its concomitant self-pity. It is the mechanism by which by classifying everything as bad, we allow for negative behavior. We wallow in self-pity, self-fixation. And that wallowing in self-pity, self-fixation is what very quietly, in a very stealth mode, allows us to create negative behavior toward others. We feel justified stabbing others because, after all, it's like, I am so miserable. I'm feeling so bad. Why is it that you don't understand me? Why do you expect me to smile at you? Why do you expect me to help you? Why do you expect me to do anything? I am feeling so miserable. I am feeling so, it's all about me. This my misery. You know, I have the worst children. I have the worst parents. I have the worst boss. Everything is against me. Why do you want me to wake up and go help you when the world is all against me? So this mechanism is what we really, as practitioners, we need to become very aware of. This is where we really have to do the practice. So when difficult experiences arise, don't confuse practice with just sitting on a cushion and breathing deeply and feeling some kind of peace for a moment. We have to fight these mechanisms is where we have to turn our mind to. This is what we have to work on. This is what we have to reverse. We have to kind of subvert millennia and countless lifetimes of self-fixation. This is where we have to practice. Because when we say, I'm anxious, look at me, listen to my endless complaints, this deep satisfaction with finding everything is wrong, as bad, broken, always unfailingly against me, this voice is the voice of ego. This is what and where the work has to take place. We only work on ourselves. We reprogram, we rehabituate, we reconstruct, and we remodel ourselves like remodeling a house. We remodel ourselves through awareness, through basic sanity. And only then can we let our fundamental nature come forward instead of living in this tiny little cage of the ego, this little portion of conceptual mind. We can walk out into the brightness of the sun of our basic awareness of our Buddha nature, because that really is who we are. We are not this broken thing. We are not this self-suffering, self-pitying thing. We are something completely else. Our Buddha nature is our reality. So no need to play in the mud of the ego. No need to play with the mud. Make pottery of illusory sets of self. No need to waste time defending perpetual misery in order to sustain it and be satisfied with it. Lying to ourselves, not seeing, forcefully being deceived by our ego. We abandon the self, we simply drop the self. We drop the self-cherishing. Each time we feel its energy rise to the surface in form of fear, anxiety, judgment, gossip, all of it. You know, we don't have to be hurling insults at others. We don't have to be saying horrendous things or not helping them or not even being aware of them while we wallow in self-pity. Self-pity can take many forms. You know, as forms of anxiety and depression are also often could be these kinds of states of very solidified self-fixation. This is what we need to abandon. This is what we have to liberate ourselves from. We have to abandon our love to pathology, of the state of addiction to misery. Because if we were not addicted to this pathology, to this misery, why would we reinforce it with every sunrise and sunset? And abandon it like we have to abandon it like every other addiction by first saying, this addiction, this malady, this malaise is not out there. It is in here. It is in me. It's not my bad mother. It's not my difficult child. It's not my monstrous boss. It's not my bad neighbor. It's me. Let them be how they are. Let others be as they are. We work on ourselves. We are the ones who are trying to get out of the prison, the cage of the ego, and see our Buddha nature. We have to say, I want this addiction to cynicism, to judgment, to projecting negativity to stop now. We have to, this is what practice is. We say, we examine every moment. We ask ourselves, is this a negative or a positive deed? Is this a negative or a positive word? Is this a negative or a positive thought? We have to want to say, we want to stop negativity now. And each and every moment we examine the state of our mind, which is the bodhisattva, the 37 bodhisattva practices, finishes. The number 37 says, And always we ask, what is the state of my mind? Because it's from the state of my mind that the words and the actions flow. So we always have to be aware of the state of our mind, and ultimately everything is reflection of our mind. Our mind is our reality, and we have to wake it up forcefully from the nightmare that we've enjoyed for endless lives and countless bodies. We have to change our mind. If we change our mind, we change our experience. And that's what the four thoughts that turn the mind speak to. It's what the six paramitas speak to, and the whole Buddhist path of the 37 bodhisattva practices speak to. Um, we for that we need two things. We need the view. We have to start to understand what is reality, and the second is the methods, the activity, our actions is what we do based on that view. And so waking up from constantly craving and sustaining negativity is something we as practitioners have to engage in very, very vigilantly. We have to be very vigilant with our mind, and we have to deconstruct and dismantle this habituation of negativity, suffering, and being addicted to it. I just realized this as a personal experience, how very much we are addicted to negativity. I find it in myself. I hope this resonates with others. And I feel like this is, this kind of awareness is a beginning of practice. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Everybody appreciates it. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your experience. We're going to take some questions. You can use the Q&A function. Nick also put up a link to the book that I mentioned, I think, in the chat section. Yeah, okay.
And we'll write the book from which I read. We'll post it later also.
Nick, it's called The Power of Mind by Khentrul Lodro Taye. Good morning. I'm new to trying meditation. I have a spinal cord injury, 24/7 pain and disability, and some brain issue, especially with word finding and calming my thoughts. Have you heard meditation is good for dealing with pain and the many anxieties that come with it? Well, I can't really say for sure or not regarding pain. Meditation is not something that I've applied personally with pain and those things that you describe. You talk about calming your thoughts you have issues with. Yes. Meditation is good for working with your thoughts. If your thoughts are causing a lot of anxiety, meditation is something that can absolutely help with that. We always add the disclaimer, though, if your anxiety is at chronic level, that's, to the point where you may need some kind of medication or psychotherapy or psychiatry or things like that. Chronic anxiety can lean in that direction, so I don't see it as a replacement for that kind of professional help if that's maybe what you need. But for calming thoughts, working with thoughts, meditation certainly is a modality that can help. This class primarily works with meditation as a method of Buddhism, which ultimately is about destroying delusion and getting beyond the delusion created by the ego that doesn't allow us to see our Buddha nature, who we truly are, how we truly exist in the world. What advice would you give to a 16-year-old? Oh, if I was 16, I would have loved to have been exposed to Buddha Dharma at 16. So this book The Power of Mind by Kentrel Lodro Taye Rinpoche. I would say read that book.
And I would give advice to the 16-year-old also in regard to this book, is the teachers always emphasize that our true state, our true nature, is stainless and always perfect. It is incapable of being damaged or stained or impure. The persona we fabricate through our conceptual mind, how we try to fit in, and the difficulty of all of that, the anxiety of being looked at in this way or in that way, being aggressive as a means of communicating with the world, etc., etc. Those are just all superficial layers. They're like the mind on the surface of our Buddha nature, which is perfect and stainless. And I think when a person becomes exposed to these, first as ideas and later, hopefully, as direct experiences, I think that their everything grows in a positive way and may help, because at 16 you're more than capable of understanding such kinds of ideas, and you could be an amazing meditator at 16. You have enough adulthood, and yet you are not so fixated and so overwhelmed with opinions and accepting them and habituating them that you can't see past them. It's a perfect time to really kind of start to take up practice and to learn about your true nature.
Michael said earlier, never knowing when our time is up. Honestly, that's very true, but very scary and something I struggle with. Any suggestions on easing the anxiety of our own mortality? I would read this book, Living is Dying. Because you have to shift your mind into thinking that life and death are the same thing in a way, which is what Rinpoche, Zonche Khyentse Rinpoche really says, because consciousness and mind has no beginning, has no end, and always exists. So in essence, there is no dying and there is no being born. That's just something that we experience and just happens in our mind. But it doesn't alter the continuity of our mind. And I think the more we educate ourselves on that, and the more we have faith in that, and understand that, the less scared we're going to be. For people who don't understand that what you're experiencing, both in life and in the bardo, in between lives, are projections of your own mind. It's completely terrifying, because when you die, the mind is separated from the body, right? For the first time in this body, for the first time without this body, right? So the mind is. So everything you experience, you're not experiencing through like the eyes, nose, mouth, but you are experiencing it. You're still aware. You are experiencing things, and everything's so much more heightened because there's none of the grounding of the elemental composition of the body that kind of grounds our input and grounds our experience to this kind of physical sense perception. So it's just, untethered to anything grounding, and it's very, very intense and much more magnified. So the more you can educate yourself about that and learn about that process and what happens, I think the less scary you're going to be. This book, Living is Dying, is a good place to start. You mentioned, Victoria, being mindful of suffering. Someone else's experience versus our own, surrounded by Western luxuries, for example. How can we reconcile accepting our reality and allowing ourselves to feel, but also not being put off, also not put it off by reminding ourselves that someone else has it worse?
We put everything into perspective when we start to feel suffering. Most of our suffering is very much a self-pity. Sometimes people say negative things, but instead of taking them as strikes against ourselves, we look at them and we say, these people are saying these things as a result of being or having an afflicted mind. We keep the thing there where it kind of originates. We don't take this as an arrow into our heart. We remind ourselves that what we consider suffering would be a mark of incredible happiness to someone who is living in the slums and maybe not even having a solid meal a day, not capable of feeding their children. So when we lay around with our cup of tea and we feel suffering, we should focus our mind to bodhicitta and think about others, this way diminishing uh, what we call suffering or experience as suffering. At the same time, we don't need to feel guilt that we're laying in a beautiful bed with a beautiful cup of tea. It is our karma. That karma is a product of our previous actions, just as anyone's karma. Karma, the word karma itself in Sanskrit means just action. Every time we act, which is thought, speech, body. We think something, we say something, we do something. It's like planting a seed. Start to think of everything we think, say, do as putting a seed into the soil. When we lay in bed with a cup of tea, that is perception is experiencing the result of karma. When we're laying around in bed with a cup of tea, we're perceiving the result of our previous karma. We don't need to feel guilty about it. What we need to do is constantly examine what is happening right now, because what is happening now is the stream, which is our consciousness, our mind. We need to make sure that that remains and is always virtuous. What does it mean, virtuous? Not selfish. And we've talked about it all the time. How do we become not selfish? Well, thinking of others and doing tonglen and doing other kinds of practices. Even saying the four immeasurables toward others when we think of their suffering is virtuous action. It's the virtuous action of body, speech, and mind, because we think it, we wish them well, we say the prayer, and saying the prayer is also committing it to action. So that's how we do it. There's no need to engage in these kinds of superfluous behaviors of being guilty or whatever. If you have extra and you're impelled and you want to act on your generosity, be generous. Share the moment the thought arises of how others need. Go out to a soup kitchen, do things. There's always opportunities to benefit others, and that is what the virtuous mind is, benefiting others. It is the opposite of only benefiting oneself. Actually, when you are benefiting others, you're also benefiting yourself, because you are cutting down the darkness of ignorance and the hold of ego on all totality of our energy and our expression, the expression of body, speech, and mind. So we do it like that. That's practice.
How many times should you meditate per day? You say, I'm just starting to meditate. It's good to, when you're starting, it's, I would, start with once a day for short amounts of time and see what happens.
And in between formal sessions of sitting on the cushion, make sure that whatever you do, for example, you're thinking about impermanence, you're thinking about how to turn your mind from negative to altruistic mind. Keep thinking of it in the world. Ask yourself, did I speak to my child the right way? Did I say the right thing to my neighbor? Did I do the right thing? Always examine, is my action coming from being aggressive, or is my action coming from love and patience? We practice on and off the cushion. The practice never stops.
And there's a few questions about death. I read the book because it goes into great detail, and rather than just give some quick, because we're running out of time, I don't want to just give any quick encapsulation of anything like that. So if you have questions, if it's something that you're scared of, interested in, read this book. To the person who asked a question about pain, this person here is writing that meditation has helped a great deal with pain. The pain's always there, but practice has helped move my mind away from the affected areas. The pain persists, but the mind is spread out rather than focused in one place. Very good.
Also, you can do a very effective practice when you have pain. You take that pain that you're experiencing yourself, and then you gather it through Tonglen. You say, all beings who are having the same kind of pain like I am right now, and you take it in as dark light and you breathe out the white light to them, you are included in this purification. We never do practices only for ourselves, of course, and that is a huge aid.
As in, how do you consult career and self-fixation? Buddhism. I study Buddhism. I mean, a career is not no separate than any other component of life. You know what I mean? Dealing with your neighbors, dealing with living, dealing with reading the newspaper and the tragedies that go on in the world. It's I don't separate being my job from anything, any other kind of component from life. Practice. As a Buddhist, it's one. That's all the answers are there, you know what I mean? All the methods are there to deal with life. I don't really separate it. Book recommendation, The Power of Mind by Khenpo Lodro Taye Rinpoche. Daily practice, do 9 minutes of meditation as a beginner. 101, start with that. Do it every day. That's the best thing you could start with.
And if you can't, try to do it morning and evening. Morning before you start anything, just have your cup of coffee, sit, and then before you go to sleep, also sit. It'll produce really good states of mind.
I lost a lifetime of valuables in a break-in. I feared this kind of loss all my life. Well, I am okay and have accepted it and ready to move on. The huge loss has not undone me, and I'm not sure why. How does this fit? Well, impermanence is a big thing. You know what I mean? Everything. Whether or not it's gonna be stolen or lost or be burned up in a fire or whatever that happens, eventually you'll be separated from it because So that's one of the lessons. The other thing is that when difficult things happen to us, it's the ripening of past karma, and it might not be from this life; it could be from past lives. So when the ripening happens, that negative karma that you created, maybe from a negative act, most likely maybe you stole from someone in a past life, or maybe this life, which created this seed of negative karma that became ripened with you being stolen from. You can at least say that that negative karma now has been exhausted and you have moved on from it. That's a good thing to remember.
You also prefaced saying that all your life you have had an anxiety about this kind of stuff. So if you take the obstacles on the path and you make it a part of practice, think of it this way. Well, now you don't have these things. You no longer possess the burden, these things which cause you this anxiety. So if you embrace living without anxiety, which is tantamount as living without these things, you can see it as a thing of freedom and being liberated from something that was a yoke for obviously for a very long time in your life. So if you connect yourself to the freedom from anxiety and being liberated from these things which cause you anxiety, you may experience this as a very precious moment.
Okay, this will have to be the last question because we're well, let's see if we can get to another one. Do you turn to meditation as a way to calm the mind and understand the suffering of others?
Of course.
Yes, not just meditation. Again, for me and Victoria, meditation is a method of is a method used and taught through Buddhism. I don't separate it from the teachings and the Dharma. You know what I mean? So it's not just this thing I use. Actually, Zonsa Khenpo Rinpoche has a book called Not for Happiness, where he talks about if meditation is just for you to feel calm, it's probably not the best thing in the world. You might be better getting a massage or something, because meditation is really to look at the mind and start to work with the mind. That can be the opposite of calm, because you have to, it's a challenge dealing with your own negative emotions and your own negative habitual patterns and things like that. At the same time, often working with those things can start to liberate us from those things. So there is an aspect of becoming calmer as a person, more grounded through practice. Understanding the suffering of others, absolutely, through the teachings, more so than meditation. Understanding the suffering of others, and that everyone suffers, whether or not. I mean, you're talking about the pain and suffering in Iran right now, which there's pain and suffering greatly over there right now, and people have lost their lives, and again, there's suffering in samsara is ubiquitous and never ending. Samsara, the suffering of samsara is endless. Enlightenment, right, is the only real way to finally put an end to that, and that's really the ultimate realization of the Buddha mind.
Becoming aware of others, especially becoming aware of their suffering, is a sign that your mind, that the selfishness, the core, this grasp of selfishness on us is starting to soften. It's a very good sign that practice is actually taking place.
Okay, we're gonna have to close today. If you didn't get your question answered, you can send it to our email, which is I never remember the email address. Nick, you post what that is. I'm sorry. In the meantime, it's Michael Imperioli Meditation 101 at Gmail. Okay, well, let's close by dedicating the merit from today's class for the benefit of all beings. By this merit, may all beings attain a state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Nick Salillo, our producer, without whom we would not be able to do this, and thanks to his kindness and generosity. See you next week.